How you doing, Jodi?
I am great. How are you doing?
I am excellent.
Awesome.
We're here for this event here. It's an arm wrestling event. Tell us about this event and what it means for Ottawa.
Yeah, well, this is the one of the WAL, World Arm Wrestling League qualifying events. This is one of the events that helps to rank competitors to fit their placement to see if they can go on to the finals in Las Vegas in June.
Very cool, very cool. And you're a competitor, obviously, in this sport. Mm-hmm. Tell us, and you're competing.
I'm not competing
today.
No,
not today, but in 3 weeks.
Yeah, I'm competing in LA in 3 weeks.
Right.
It's actually the final qualifier for the finals.
Very
Las
cool.
Vegas.
Very cool. What got you into the sport? Because I believe there's a family connection here. Yes.
There is a family connection, and if I'm being honest, I was dragged begrudgingly by the toenails into the sport.
Wow.
It was not something I wanted to ever do. In fact, I resented the sport of arm
Really?
wrestling.
Really?
Yeah. So I'll tell you why. So my husband
Please.
is Devin Larratt. He's the #1 arm wrestler in the world. Blah blah blah. And he was also military. So for 20 years, he did special forces, and he had a job that took him away from the family. And, as you do when you have that job. And then he had this other thing that took him away, this arm wrestling thing. So there was like a lot of that kind of stuff that I didn't really love that it was taking him away so much at the time. Anyway, prior to us having children, which was like forever, 20 years ago or something.
Okay.
Devin would take me to these arm wrestling competitions with him.
Right.
When we were, young and not wise. And he said that in order for me to actually come and watch these tournaments, I had to compete.
Interesting.
So here's this person who's never trained for arm wrestling.
Have you ever done any other sports?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Lots of other sports. Soccer was like my big thing. And
cool. What position did you play?
I played everything by the time I was done, but probably more halfback defense.
Okay.
But yeah, I played everything.
She does everything.
I did. Well, see, this is what we're going to do. Well, I'll get to that. I'll fast forward to that in a minute. But yeah, so I would compete at these tournaments without any training or experience. And I'd win a couple matches against these poor other girlfriends who were forced by their boyfriends. Wait a minute,
they were all dragged too? The other competitors were all dragged?
Yeah. Well, not all of them.
Okay.
There'd be some, but those are the only ones I had a chance of beating because, of course, I would never have a chance of beating a competitive arm wrestler who trained for it without any experience. It's not really likely to happen.
It doesn't happen in the sport?
I mean, it doesn't really, no. I don't want to say, there's always some random thing, but if you're competing against a competitive athlete in any sport, you need to know what you're doing.
Good point.
So then we had some kids, and we'd start to go to these competitions, and of course Devin was the primary competitor, so he couldn't carry the kids around all day because that would tire him out. Wow. So the kids were in my arms, and then I tried to compete. I was like, this is not working.
So your arms are bigger than his, is what you're saying?
I'm much stronger, clearly, than my husband. But most women are, right? So.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
So. And anyway, so I just kind of let it go for a while, for a long while we had these kids and life and whatever. But in 2012, I was playing soccer, as I mentioned, and I severed my ACL on my left knee. Wow. So no more ACL. I'd had lots of tears before, partials, but this one's done. It's like, this is sadly the end of soccer for me. Like, I know this is done. So being the competitive person that I am, I needed something to replace the sport, and it just coincided by happenstance with Devin and I going to do a seminar in Mexico.
For arm wrestling.
Interesting. And it was actually like our honeymoon because we'd never had one without kids. So we had 10 days alone without kids to go and do this thing. And I had this basic epiphany, which should have happened long ago, that I've got the best arm wrestler in the world, not only physically, but the most knowledgeable teacher of the sport at my disposal. And I'm wasting this opportunity.
Wow.
So timing-wise.
Did you talk to him about wanting to train?
Yeah.
Take it more seriously? Elaborate on that.
I did.
What happened in Mexico?
In Mexico, I just, I watched him teaching all these people, and I was like, I'm just going to start doing, and I always, if I'm around arm wrestling, I'd always do a little bit, but I wouldn't actively go and seek this stuff. So basically, it was after that, I said, I'm going to train for arm wrestling now. And back now, remember, in the initial days, this was the guy who was like, you need to compete. And when I told him I was going to train, he was like, out of your mind? Why would you want to do this sport at this point in your life? Just because he's protective and he knows that there are certain injuries and whatever. So I think that he also wasn't, wasn't convinced that I was going to be committed to it. So he didn't want me to sort of partially do it and not, stay in it and get
right, because you're representing the family you guys
no.
share. Is it that sort of?
No, I think more it had to do with he just wanted me to, he just wanted to protect me from getting injured by doing,
that's a caring person.
like like from doing, as I said, going into these massive competitions and not being well trained. There are injuries in every sport, of course, in every sport, but you limit yourself with arm wrestling to the kinds of injuries that you're going to get based on the kinds of training that you do, and also. Like the worst thing that's going to happen to you in arm wrestling is a broken arm.
Right.
You're not going to get concussed. You're not going to have spinal injury damage. You're not going to.
Good point. Yes.
So, but still,
we see a lot of these injuries in other sports, mainly combat and contact sports. Now, what's the scene for women arm wrestlers? How would you describe the scene in terms of? Are there lots of participants? Is it very? Elaborate on that.
Well, I think primarily,
and then give us a comparison on the men's scene.
Okay, so I think arm wrestling is like most strength sports. I think initially, certainly historically, men are more prominent in these sports because genetically they lay down more muscle. They're physically stronger. That's kind of what these strength sports have represented in the past. And it is, it's changed. It's 2017. Like I almost feel like this question's kind of redundant at this point in a way,
Yes,
but we still have to address it. I understand. Certainly,
I guess what I'm asking is the level of competition. Are there a lot of female competitors regionally in Ontario and Quebec and nationally competing in the sport?
So
because it's making a resurgence, is it not?
Yeah. Well, arm wrestling is certainly getting a lot more attention and coverage. And anything like that, any sport or activity that starts to get a momentum going ends up drawing more people in.
Right.
And so when you have representatives who are women, like myself or whoever, that are being seen on doing this sport, it makes it more accessible for other women to join and start to come in.
Right.
So I think that's happening. Certainly, it's getting better, but it's definitely by no means equal in the numbers of competitors. But I'm going to tell you one thing that's interesting I find about women who are arm wrestling, and it may be slightly stereotyping, and I'll totally take that. But I've now trained with our club at our house, the Ottawa High Hookers. I have trained with so many people. Primarily, we have men. We have a couple women who come in, but I can tell you that when women come in, what they do at the table is completely different from the get-go than men do. What they do...
How? Please elaborate. I'm curious. Yes.
They listen.
Wow.
They listen,
but
and they take direction well.
It's funny you say that because I think, as a fan of various combat sports and contact sports, and from what I've seen alone, I think women are better combat sports athletes because of the fact that they're more technical, they're more coachable, there's less ego, and there's more collaboration, cooperativeness. Generally, those are known as feminine traits, right? But in terms of combat sports and as team-based sports, women tend to do, I'm generalizing here, tend to do well in these sports.
And I would agree. And again, at the risk of us both generalizing, it's been my experience. And the ego thing is a really big deal.
It's really, when it's pushed aside
for anyone, And that's not to say, there have been a lot of great students who are men coming into our club. I'm not taking that away, but what I find is that though the numbers are lower significantly for women, the quality of their ability in the sport is not lower. And, you still get fantastic athletes who are developed.
Very cool.
Period. Yeah.
Very cool. Now, there's also at this event here, there were also children competing.
Yes, that's right.
Speak on that. Give us an idea of children doing arm wrestling. Is that a growing trend as well, or? Well,
it's the future of our sport.
Right.
We've got all these old timer champions here who they're going to die. It's going to happen, and you need to bring them in. A lot of the kids that you'll see arm wrestling are children of arm wrestlers, right? So you've got all these people who
continuity. Yes.
Yeah, you can't help it. In fact, I have the best picture of my first son being born and Devin having his little little pinky being held onto by her baby, and he's just doing like this little, so it's like training his top roll there a little bit, getting that going. Yeah, so kids, they if they're around it, they do it. But here's what the really great thing is about being a kid and starting in arm wrestling in particular. I think in any sport, but in arm wrestling in particular, if they start before puberty, what happens is they're going to lay down connective tissue strength as they grow through, and they're going to have a whole lot less injuries. They're going to be technically so much better on the table than when you start this sport as an adult. Because arm wrestling, the strength and the motion and movement of arm wrestling is not replicated in any other portion of our lives, really. Like, it's not natural. The things that we do to arm wrestle, not so much. You're not doing them in the gym. You're not, you're not walking around in an arm wrestling training capacity by lifting up a box or something, But so you've got strength. A lot of people come to the sport, they're very strong. They've been working out their whole lives. They're fit in lots of sports. But they don't have the connective tissue development to be doing the kinds of things that the professional arm wrestlers do and build over time. And because they're already so strong, the risk of injury is higher if they're not doing it in good form. But as kids, they learn it, they grow it from the beginning, and their injury risk is so much less. And as you know, in any kind of competitive sport, if you can prevent injury, you're going to do a lot better.
For sure. I mean, people always talk about, I saw a video of two people arm wrestling, and that typical... that sound. It's not so much the visual, I find. It's the sound that it makes.
Awful.
It's like,
yeah. Oh, but, it's awful.
So so you guys coach athletes in this sport. Tell us what aspect of the game. I think you've spoken about listening to your coach in terms of the technique. What aspect is the hardest for someone who's just walking into the sport, the complete beginner who's curious? What aspect of the game is the most challenging? I'm generalizing.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I sort of just touched on it, but it's that the thing that we all think arm wrestling is as kids when we're at the table with our classmate and you say, I'll arm wrestle you for it, and then we do this, like, brah, brah. This is not arm wrestling. It's not just your arm. Arm wrestling is a full body
movement
sport. And it's the idea of connecting the whole body in a way that you can apply your strength to be able to move. And I think that the movements are, as I said, they're very unnatural. So the hardest thing for anyone who's new coming into the sport is learning how to move very unnaturally with their body in the way that's required for this sport.
Now, tell us, where can people find out about your gym, where you train? You train future arm wrestling champions, and tell us where we can find you.
So my husband and I were in Richmond, just outside of Ottawa, Ontario, and we typically will post on Devin's Facebook page, Devin Larratt. When we have practices, we try to have them twice a week, but we have a lot of things in our lives come up, so we shift them around a little bit sometimes. And you can't become his friend because he's way too popular and has too many friends, but you can follow him, and then you can see his posts.
Cool.
For when practices are. But you can just send him a message on Facebook. He will get it, and find out more about the Club Valley. It's
cool.
And it's free. There's no cost associated with it.
You're making it very accessible for people.
Yeah. Well, we just want to develop the sport. That's it.
That's awesome.
And kids typically are once a week. We do kids practices once a week.
Now, one last question. Your competition in 3 weeks. What? How are you training for it, and how do you feel mentally going into? I mean, traveling all the way to California to Los Angeles for this. What's happening?
So I compete in the 128-pound weight class. So and I'm 5'8.5". So 128 pounds for me is light. So part of my training is always making sure that I have got some weight to lose during this. So that's, I think, the most challenging aspect is trying to lose fat while gaining strength. I think that's probably the most challenging part of my training. But I've done it a few times now, and I know how to do it well without doing kind of crazy weight cut stuff.
Right.
Right now I'm doing a really heavy, probably about 10 days I've got about 3 or 4 days left of that. Really heavy as much as I can, kind of work on my arm, our own very specific arm wrestling tools that we've developed in our basement, and
Cool.
training on the table time practice with the club. And then I'm going to start my taper slightly after that, and so I'll have just under 2 weeks of kind of starting to taper down and just more drop out carbs at the end and do all that weight stuff. So it's just putting mileage on right now, just trying to really get as much blood flow in all the connective tissue and all the movements that need to be doing.
One last question.
Yeah.
I find this all interesting because it's two people are facing off, and it's very up close and personal. Psychologically, elaborate on. It seems like a very intense sport.
Yes.
Do you guys do any form of? Is there trash talking? Is there
Is there trash talking in arm wrestling?
Yeah. Well, I again, honestly, I don't know much about this sport, but is there trash talking? And what role does mental training have in this? It seems like a very mental sort of sport. Is that?
Yeah, for sure. You need to have the whole package. It is an absolute pressure cooker when you're up there, across the table, as you said, from one person. It's very intimate. It's very intense. And a lot of times now in particular, there's a lot of coverage. There's media everywhere. There's
There's a crowd of people, right?
Yeah.
The
And
room
this
gets
is small.
quiet.
This is small.
Right.
This is small. This is a small qualifier. Ontario doesn't have as many competitors. You're sort of touching on that before. It doesn't have as many competitors that are competing in the World Arm Wrestling League as other areas. This is just a small one. But when you get into the bigger venues and the bigger events, there's a lot happening all the time. So if you're not able to remove yourself from the pressure externally, you can't really focus on what you need to do. There's a lot of visualization that happens certainly on our end. My husband and I, and I think any athlete really at a certain point gets to that where they have to start seeing what needs to happen, or going through all the possibilities and really just getting themselves to the place they need to be at.
One more question.
Sure.
Last one.
I know, it's fascinating
It
stuff.
is.
You
It
can't
really
stop
is.
talking
And
about it.
Thank you for
It's my
partaking in
pleasure.
this. As a coach, how would you? Your coach is your husband, yes?
Yeah. Well, he started, but certainly the whole club. We have amazing members, super smart arm wrestlers in the club, and we all
Also,
coach
it's a
each other.
collaborative approach.
Yeah,
to this.
definitely.
Cool.
I will tell you, at the risk of sounding incredibly arrogant, we are the best club in the world.
How's
And
that
we
arrogance?
have people who come from all over the world to train with us.
Yeah, I've seen some pictures on the Facebook and on the Facebook.
On the Facebook. Yes.
But I guess what I was going to ask is the fact that you guys have access to, as you mentioned in the opening, one of the best arm wrestlers in the world.
Yep.
In the National Capital Region. What can Ottawa do to support this sport? Because I'll be honest, it's amazing that this region has a champion, right?
I know that no one knows about.
Well,
I know.
That for me, as someone who works in communications, marketing, social media, etc., I find that kind of, and this is why we're here. This is why I'm we're covering this as local media and so on. But I think there's clearly a need to promote this sport, and when you have like a local champion, it's like, oh, you know what I mean? It's,
the world champion locally.
Yes.
Yeah. He's not.
You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? Right?
No, 100%. And I think it's coming for one. With the WAL, they're live on ESPN.
Right.
They're live
Yes.
they're all across like the like Australia, New Zealand, and Europe.
Right.
They're all over the place right now. For whatever reason, Canada hasn't. Our sports networks haven't signed on yet. I think it's just a matter
Of time,
And I think that the more exposure with events and stuff that we have, the better. And I just think that it literally, Devin doesn't leave the country without someone pointing him out, knowing who he is, recognizing
so
arm
he's
wrestling.
getting-
It's all over. But in Canada, not so much, and that's okay, kind of, because we still have this sort of private life.
Right,
But the sport of arm wrestling is growing. I would love to see more coverage with Canadian sports.
You hear that,
chance.
TSN?
Yeah, I mean, seriously, just dot that I and cross that T already. Let's go.
Great. Thank you very much for your time. It was an awesome interview, and all the best in California.
Thank you very much.
Maybe we should arm wrestle. No, you'll beat me.
No, what we're going to do is we're going to do the arm wrestling handshake, okay? We're just going to do the arm wrestling handshake. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you.
There you go. That's it.
Cool. Thank you.
My pleasure.